My name is Jenny, and I graduated from college with a degree in programming. Unlike most of my classmates who tried to find a job after graduation, looking through vacancies, sending dozens of resumes, and going through endless interviews, often to no avail. I got my job back in my third year, when, not really hoping for success, I applied for a summer internship at Soft Tech Solutions, a medium-sized software development company, which, to my surprise, noticed me among hundreds of the same students and offered me not only an internship, but also the opportunity to stay in the team on a permanent basis. When I received an official job offer from them at the beginning of my last academic year, it looked generous enough that I could afford to move into my own home immediately after graduation, start living on my own, and arrange my life the way I wanted, without having to adjust to someone else's requirements and expectations. However, I didn't do it. "Jenny, we were hoping that you would consider staying with us a little longer," Mom said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. She looked at me with a slight hesitation, as if she was afraid that I would immediately start protesting, but there was hope in her eyes. Dad, who was sitting next to her, nodded silently, looking a little embarrassed, as if he didn't fully understand why this conversation was unpleasant to him. I frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" I asked, carefully putting my fork down on the edge of my plate. "I thought you'd be happy to finally have a house to yourself." I really thought so. All my childhood, I heard how my mother dreamed of converting my room into a cozy study or a small art studio, how my father wanted to get rid of all my books, textbooks, and boxes of children's toys that I could not throw away. Weren't they waiting for this moment? Dad cleared his throat, as if he was about to say something unpleasant. "Well, honey, the truth is, we've been having a hard time paying all the bills lately." He looked at his mom, hoping she would pick up the conversation. "Dad and I are not getting any younger, but our expenses continue to grow," Mom hurriedly added, "and if you would stay and maybe contribute a little to the household, it would help us a lot." I froze, looking at their worried faces. These were the people who raised me, who, despite the difficult times, supported me in college, even if not always financially, but morally for sure. I'd been dreaming about my own place for years, imagining how I'd design an apartment, how I'd be able to come home and enjoy the quiet, how I wouldn't have to explain to anyone else where I'd been and why I'd returned so late. But now that I was sitting in front of my parents, who clearly needed help, I couldn't just say no. "How much would it help?" I asked quietly, and the relief on their faces was instant. Dad didn't think twice. "Maybe $1,000 a month?" he suggested. "For bills and groceries," Mom added, as if trying to show that the money would go not to their whims, but to the most necessary things. So at the age of 22, I became my parents' breadwinner. I stayed at my parents' house, transferred $1,000 to them every month, and watched the rest of my salary grow slowly but steadily in my savings account. I didn't spend much on myself, only on the essentials and occasionally on small pleasures. Shopping didn't seem important to me, and I honestly didn't understand why I would spend money on things I didn't need. My sister Olivia had a completely different philosophy about money. She was 7 years older than me, married to her college sweetheart James. They had a 7-year-old son, Bruce, and they lived in a luxury rented apartment on the other side of town, as if they were awash in money, although in fact it was far from the truth. "Oh, my God, Jenny. Are you seriously wearing that t-shirt again?" Olivia said during one of her Sunday visits. She was sprawled out on our parents' couch, scrolling through the social media feed on her phone, while James and Dad were watching football, and Mom was playing with Bruce. I looked at myself, a simple blue t-shirt, the most ordinary, comfortable, without logos and drawings. "What's wrong with her?" I asked, puzzled. Olivia rolled her eyes with a dramatic sigh. "I saw you in this in your Facebook photo last year. Don't you ever buy new clothes?" "The new Stella McCartney line came out a few weeks ago," she added, as if that was information I should be interested in. "I don't need any new clothes." "These things look great," I replied calmly, trying not to let her touch me to the quick. Olivia looked at me with obvious disappointment. "That's why you're still single, Jenny," she said, and it seemed to me that there was even something like genuine regret in her voice. I crossed my arms over my chest. "So you think that the lack of designer clothes is a character flaw?" "Well, no normal guy wants a girl who looks like she's shopping at Goodwill," she said, returning to the phone screen. I bit my tongue, even though I wanted to point out to her that even though I didn't really spend money on expensive clothes, I had a growing savings account. She and James lived paycheck to paycheck, despite his seemingly high-paying job in finance, which, according to Olivia, provided them with a decent standard of living, but in reality the standard of living was more like an endless race to fit a certain image of a successful family, which they were not. Olivia worked part-time at a boutique mostly, as she put it, to keep from dying of boredom while Bruce was at school and while James was doing his important things. Their combined income disappeared as quickly as it appeared: vacations in tropical countries, dinners in trendy restaurants, clothes from the latest collections, the occasional expensive purchase that they made simply because they could. Or they thought they could. "Hi, Jenny," Olivia said later that day, cornering me in the kitchen while I washed the dishes after dinner. Her voice changed from mocking to sweet, almost ingratiating, and I already knew what was coming. "Can I borrow $200? "What is it?" she asked almost innocently, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. "I've been eyeing up one amazing dress, and I'm missing it a little this month." I sighed, rinsing the plate and putting it in the dryer. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. "Sure," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Olivia immediately flashed a smile, gave me a quick hug, and then pulled away, pulling out her phone. "You're the best. That's why you're my beloved sister." "I'm your only sister," I reminded her, but she was already typing something on her phone, probably telling someone that she could afford this dress now. When I wasn't at my main job, I spent most of my evenings working on a side project, a home security application that I believed could revolutionize the way people watch their homes. It would integrate with existing surveillance cameras, but would add smart alerts and user-friendly controls that were desperately lacking in the current market. It was my passion, something that really fascinated me, but of course my parents didn't understand it. "Jenny, it's almost midnight. Why are you still on the computer?" Mom complained, standing in the doorway in her bathrobe and with a pile of freshly ironed underwear in her hands. "You're only increasing our electricity bill." "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm just finishing something important," I replied without looking up from the screen. I heard her sigh in exasperation and go back to the bedroom, but as she walked down the hall, I caught my father's muffled voice. "All she does is play these stupid games," he muttered. "No wonder she can't find a boyfriend," Mom added. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I didn't correct them. They wouldn't understand what I was working on anyway, and I didn't have the energy to explain. Sometimes it was easier to let people believe what they wanted to believe. I had no idea that my quiet, predictable life, in which I saved money and secretly wrote codes, was about to be turned upside down in ways I couldn't even imagine. The first signs of trouble appeared on Tuesday evening, when I returned from work and found that our entrance was literally packed with cars, and there was a large box propped up on the porch. The interior of the house was in chaos. The living room was littered with stacked boxes, suitcases, and random furniture, and my parents seemed to be rushing back and forth under the guidance of Olivia, who looked like she was leading an emergency relocation operation. "What's going on?" I asked, standing in the doorway. "Are you moving?" James appeared from the hallway, looking depressed and exhausted in a way I'd never seen him before. He usually carried himself confidently, always with perfect posture, always in perfectly ironed clothes, but now his shoulders were hunched over, and his shirt looked like he had slept in it for several nights in a row. "James lost his job," Olivia announced before he could say anything. I looked at him, but he couldn't look me in the eye. "Can you believe how unfairly he was treated?" Olivia continued, her voice trembling with indignation. His own friend betrayed him. What happened? I asked, looking directly at James, but he just pressed his lips into a thin line. It's complicated, he muttered. Olivia snorted. They called it creative accounting, as if it were something illegal. They were just looking for an excuse to get rid of him. I frowned. They fired you? James sighed heavily and finally looked up at me. Rather, they offered to leave on their own. But why? I still didn't understand exactly what had happened. Because his colleagues are snakes. Olivia interjected, clenching her fists. James trusted one person, and he just turned him into his superiors, making some completely ridiculous accusations. This is simply outrageous. James was silent. I felt like something in this story didn't add up. Creative accounting sounded like it wasn't just about personal dislike or envy, but something more serious. So, what now? I asked cautiously. Olivia folded her arms across her chest. Now, until we find a new option, we will live here. I felt everything go cold inside of me. Here? I mean, the parents? Yes, the parents. And you. She said it so casually, as if it was something completely natural. As if it was a matter of course. As if they weren't invading my already fragile system of existence, turning my familiar world upside down. Olivia defended herself, saying that James had done nothing wrong, that he had just borrowed a little bit, but was going to pay it back as soon as they had the opportunity. However, the director, who, according to her, was supposed to be his friend, discovered all this during the audit, became enraged and, instead of understanding the difficult situation James found himself in, he simply kicked him out of his job without giving him a single chance to explain himself or fix the situation. You mean he was stealing? I asked cautiously, knowing full well that such a question in this family would be perceived as something offensive, but I needed to hear it out loud to understand how bad it was. Silence fell in the room, and my parents exchanged glances, their gazes full of the same awkwardness that occurs when someone asks an uncomfortable question that they don't want to answer. It's terrible. What else can I say? Olivia replied sharply, folding her arms across her chest. Real friends don't do that, they don't betray, but they understand when you're in a difficult situation. I opened my mouth, intending to point out that no one had forced James to embezzle other people's money, but I changed my mind. Logic was clearly not welcome in this conversation. Instead, I watched in silence as my sister commandeered our parents' house, as if it had belonged to her from the very beginning, commanding everyone around her, but at the same time not making the slightest contribution either financially or in domestic terms, which did not seem to bother anyone. At dinner, my mother, smiling cautiously, announced that Olivia, James, and Bruce would stay with them only until they get back on their feet, as if there was nothing special about this decision, as if it was something temporary, insignificant, not changing the dynamics of our whole family. I nodded and silently braced myself for what I knew would inevitably happen, a nightmare of epic proportions that began almost immediately. My quiet, orderly life, in which everything was in its place, collapsed under the chaos that Olivia and her family inevitably brought with them. James found a new job in just 2 weeks, but as he loudly complained to anyone who would listen, his salary was now half what he had received before, which meant he had to tighten his belts, which apparently meant he could no longer afford the weekly trips to the golf club or branded suits. Olivia continued to work in her boutique for just enough hours to claim that she was contributing to the family budget, but in fact her salary was barely enough to cover her own whims, let alone help with general expenses. "This chicken is so dry," Olivia complained one night at dinner, pushing her plate away and looking at the food with disgust. "Mom, you don't know how to use seasonings. We used to eat at Bellissimo's every Thursday, and their food was just amazing." Instead of telling her daughter that if she didn't like dinner, she could cook something for herself, her mother just nodded apologetically, as if she really felt obligated to please Olivia. "Sorry, honey, I'll try to do better next time. I gritted my teeth and stabbed my chicken, which, in my opinion, was completely normal, but I chose to remain silent, because I knew that any attempt to protect my mother would result in me playing the role of a heartless egotist who does not understand how hard it is for Olivia and her family. The dynamics in the house somehow changed radically. Now Olivia became the center of everyone's attention and concern. Her problems automatically became everyone's problems. Her complaints turned into well-founded grievances that required immediate resolution, and I was just somewhere on the periphery, in the role of an ATM that silently pays bills and he doesn't ask unnecessary questions. One night, I was working late on my app when the door to my room suddenly burst open and Olivia burst inside without knocking, as if she had every right to do so. "I need to borrow $300, she said with the same confidence she had when ordering coffee at the cafe. I slowly took off my headphones and turned to her, surprised not only by the amount, but also by her tone, which lacked even a hint of her usual fake politeness. "For what?" "Bruce needs new shoes, and we want to take him to M Park this weekend. He's been so upset since we moved here." "Didn't James just get paid?" I squinted, still not understanding why they didn't have enough money. "We have other expenses," Olivia snapped, looking at me as if I should have guessed what they were. "Are you going to help or not?" I gave up and transferred the money to her because I felt sorry for Bruce, who really didn't deserve all this fuss. But when Olivia approached me again the following week with the same request, I finally backed down. "Maybe you should think about a full-time job," I suggested over dinner, when she, clearly believing that she would not be refused in front of her parents, asked me for more money. She froze with a fork in her hand and looked at me as if I had just offered to sell her a kidney. "The boutique is already recruiting employees. I saw the sign in their window." Olivia's face turned red. "I can't believe how cruel you are." Olivia's voice trembled with indignation as she shot me a reproachful look. "You know I need to be available to Bruce after school." "Mom and Dad are always here," I replied calmly, pointing to my parents, who were sitting across from us at dinner, showed no signs of being too busy or overloaded with worries. "They can look after him for a couple of hours after school." "That's not the point," Olivia exclaimed, slamming her palms on the table so that the cutlery shook. I just had time to raise my eyebrows in surprise when she irritably crumpled her napkin, threw it on a plate and ran out of the dining room, stomping her feet loudly on the floor, like a teenager who was refused to buy a new phone. James, who had been watching in silence, stood up after her, giving me a look full of disapproval, as if I had just done something really mean. "Jenny, how could you be so heartless?" Mom shook her head, looking at me with disappointment, as if I had just refused to save a kitten from a tree. "Your sister is going through a difficult time." "We're all going through difficult times," I muttered, realizing that my words were meaningless because no one was even trying to hear me. Olivia didn't talk to me for a week after that, and to be honest, I took it more as a relief than a punishment. I used this unexpected lull to finally finish work on my security application, which I had been developing for months, sitting up all night, giving up weekends and sacrificing even rare moments of rest in order to bring the project to perfection. When I hunched over the keyboard, entered the last line of code, tested the system one last time and made sure that everything was working flawlessly, I felt a real thrill. Finally my work was completed, and I was ready to show it to someone who could really appreciate it. Mark, my boss, exhaled slowly as I showed him the basic functions of the app in his office. His eyes widened when I showed him how the program is able to analyze the video stream in real time, distinguish people from animals, recognize suspicious movements and send customized alerts to the owner of the house. "The user interface is so intuitive, and these algorithms." He looked at me. "Did you develop all this yourself?" I nodded, trying not to look too proud, even though I was elated inside. "It's been my side project for a while," I replied, barely hiding the tremor in my voice. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me with a new, almost appreciative respect. "Jenny, this could completely destroy the home security market," he finally said. Our company could dominate if it owned this product. My heart started pounding so fast that it seemed like it would break through my ribs anymore. This was the moment I had been striving for all these months. I'm ready to offer you $500,000 for full ownership of the program plus a percentage of future sales, Mark said calmly, cocking his head to one side. What do you think? I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face, despite the adrenaline pumping through me. $500,000. Plus royalties. It was more than I ever dreamed of getting for my project. That sounds fair, I managed to say with the same expression on my face, as if I made these kinds of deals every day. We shook hands, and when I left his office, I felt as if I had suddenly found myself in another reality. A few days later, the money was credited to my account, and I actually got rich overnight. But on the way home, I made a firm decision. I won't tell my family. If they find out, that money will disappear into the bottomless abyss of Olivia's purchases, into restaurants they can no longer afford, into unpaid bills that parents have never learned to control. This was my chance for freedom, and I wasn't going to miss it. That evening, I contacted my realtor friend Sarah, who was helping one of my colleagues find an apartment, and as I sat in the car in the driveway in front of the house, I quietly spoke to her on the phone. I'm looking for my own place. Do you want to rent or buy? She was instantly interested. Buy it. I need an apartment close to work, ready to move in quickly. Can you help me? I already have a few places in mind, Sarah replied briskly. Let's meet tomorrow after work, I'll show you everything. I smiled to myself. Everything was working out exactly the way I wanted it to. However, when I entered the house, I was greeted by a strange scene. The whole family was sitting in the living room, which was an extremely unusual sight for a weekday evening, because usually Dad was watching TV at that time, Mom was busy in the kitchen, and Olivia was complaining about something on her phone. They fell silent as soon as I crossed the threshold, and a tense silence hung in the room. There was a mixture of determination and awkwardness on their faces. Jenny, we need to talk to you, Mom said, patting the couch next to her, inviting me to sit down. I carefully sat down, crossing my arms over my chest. Dad cleared his throat. We've been monitoring our expenses, and things are going tight, Dad said, looking at me with that mixture of tension and guilt that comes when you're going to ask for more than you're entitled to. There are 5 adults and a child in the house. Utility bills have increased significantly, and groceries, you wouldn't believe how much food a growing boy needs. Your father is trying to say that. Mom hesitated for a moment, choosing her words, as if trying to make the request more gentle, but this did not change her essence. We were hoping that you could increase your help with household expenses a little. The $1,000 you're giving us no longer covers all our needs. I looked around. My parents looked confused, but there was hope in their eyes, as if they were sure that I would understand their situation and agree to a new arrangement without any questions. Meanwhile, Olivia was intently studying her manicure, pretending that it didn't concern her at all, although I had no doubt that she was the one who initiated this conversation. Or rather, James. At least he looked awkward and avoided making eye contact with me. Are Olivia and James contributing? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. My parents looked at each other, and I realized that I knew the answer even before my mother said softly, well, they're in a difficult situation right now. And I'm single, without any addiction, and I can afford to help a little more, right? I finished for her, feeling my irritation grow inside. I took a deep breath, mentally counting to 10 so I wouldn't say something I'd regret later. How much longer? We were thinking maybe $2,000 a month, Dad suggested cautiously, as if testing how far he could go. Instead of laughing, crying, or screaming, which would be the logical reaction in this situation, I just nodded, holding back my emotions. Good. Starting this month. Olivia finally raised her head, a slight smile touched her lips, and I realized that she thought she had won. Didn't she know that her victory would be short-lived? 3 days later, I met Sarah in an elegant apartment complex just 10 minutes from my office. The studio apartment she showed me was perfect, bright, modern, with a spacious living room, panoramic windows, and a cozy balcony with a beautiful view of the city. I immediately used part of the money received from the sale of my app for the purchase, without hesitation, and signed the papers on the same day. Secretly, I was furnishing my new apartment, choosing furniture that I had long dreamed of, enjoying the thought that very soon this cozy, quiet abode would become my personal space, where no one could dictate their terms to me. Meanwhile, something strange was happening at my parents' house. During dinners, Mom, Dad, and Olivia exchanged these strange glances, full of secret understanding, as if there was some secret plan between them that I wasn't supposed to know about. James was mostly silent, concentrating on his food and occasionally helping Bruce cut the meat, as if he hoped that if he kept a low profile, no one would draw him into the conversation. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was, and I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, I returned from work, tired but happy that soon I would no longer have to share my space with people who treated me like a convenient wallet, and found a pile of my belongings in the hallway. My books, clothes, laptop, even my baby teddy bear, everything was unceremoniously piled into one big pile, as if someone had just decided to get rid of unnecessary junk. What the hell, I muttered, dropping my bag on the floor and heading straight for my bedroom, even though, as it turned out, it was no longer my bedroom. Bruce was sitting on the bed, now covered with superhero-themed sheets, and, oblivious to my presence, was playing a video game. On the walls, where my programming certificates used to hang, there were now bright posters with cartoon characters. My desktop, where I created my app, was gone, and in its place now stood a small children's table, strewn with crayons, coloring books, and plastic figures. "Aunt Jenny!" Bruce exclaimed happily, looking up from the screen and smiling broadly. "Look how cool my room is now." Before I could reply, Olivia appeared behind me, not at all surprised by my return. "Oh, you're already home," she said with lazy indifference, as if nothing unusual had happened. I slowly turned to her, barely restraining myself from shouting, "What's going on here?" My voice sounded deadly calm, but inside, everything was boiling with rage. "We moved Bruce to your room," Olivia shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He needs more space for toys and schoolwork." I stared at her in silence, hoping that she would realize for herself how absurd this was, but her face remained completely impassive, as if it were something self-evident. "And where do you think I should live now?" I asked, trying not to lose my temper. Olivia blinked slowly, as if she'd just thought about it for the first time. "Well, you don't have a child. You don't need that much space," she said, as if that argument explained everything. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. That was the limit. "Where exactly should I sleep now?" I asked, looking from Olivia to my mom, who had just appeared in the doorway, nervously clasping her hands in front of her, as if she was preparing for an unpleasant conversation, but already knew that I would have to agree. "Jenny, dear," she began in a conciliatory tone, carefully taking a step forward, "we thought that since you're almost never at home anyway, always at work or at your computer, you wouldn't mind using the sofa in the living room." I narrowed my eyes, looking from her almost guilty face to Olivia, who didn't even try to hide her smug satisfaction, as if this moment was the culmination of some long-planned and successfully implemented intrigue for her. "So you moved all my stuff without even asking me?" I spoke calmly, but there was steel in every word. "We knew you'd make a fuss if we asked," Olivia replied indifferently, leaning lazily against the door frame. And Bruce really needed more space. His old room was barely bigger than a closet. Speaking of his old room, why can't I use it? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Olivia and Mom exchanged glances. I saw something like indecision flicker in Mom's eyes, but Olivia just shrugged, as if the question didn't really matter. Well, Mom hesitated slightly. We thought Olivia might need a dressing room. I blinked. A dressing room? You know how many clothes she has, and there's just no room for her in their bedroom. My mother spoke softly, as if trying to convince me that this was a perfectly reasonable decision. I stared at them, suddenly speechless. They kicked me out of my own room, the one that had been mine since I was a kid, the room that I was basically paying for with my $2,000 a month to make a damn dressing room for Olivia, a woman who didn't contribute a dime to the overall budget. I looked at Olivia, her expensive designer clothes, then at the pile of my things piled haphazardly in the hallway, and felt something slowly but inexorably snap inside. But instead of screaming, crying, or making a scene, as they probably expected, I just shrugged my shoulders. You know. It's okay, I said calmly, barely keeping the corners of my lips from smiling sarcastically. I will not sleep on the couch because I will sleep in my own apartment. Olivia snorted and laughed, as if I'd just said something absurdly ridiculous. Your imaginary apartment? Come on, Jenny, we all know you don't have one. Actually, I have one. I looked straight into her eyes. I bought it last week. Silence reigned in the room, broken only by the muffled sounds of the video game, which Bruce continued to play, not paying attention to what was happening. I was going to tell you about it this weekend, I continued, enjoying their stunned expressions, but it looks like you just made it easier for me to make a decision. Mom and Olivia stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Have you bought an apartment? Mom muttered, as if unable to comprehend what she had heard. How, and with what money? It doesn't matter, I already turned to the stairs, preparing to go down. The important thing is that I'm moving. Today. I quickly went into the living room, pulled out my phone and called the moving company, booking their next free time, which, fortunately, turned out to be early tomorrow morning. Then I dialed my boss's number, asking for a day off. All this time, my family continued to stand by, their faces expressing a mixture of shock and growing concern, as if they had just realized that their usual lives were about to change. Jenny, you can't be serious, Dad finally said, who had just come out of the garage and seemed to immediately sense that something was going on. I'm absolutely serious, I replied, ending the conversation with the movers. They'll be here at 7 tomorrow morning to pick up my things. But, we need to talk about this, Mom tried to object, taking a step toward me, as if hoping that if there was enough sympathy in her voice, I would change my mind. If you're upset about the room, we can work something out. Maybe Bruce will be able to share space with us for a while. It's not about the room, I interrupted, looking directly at her, at Dad, at Olivia. It's about respect. Within the borders. The fact that I'm paying $2,000 a month to live here, and you're still treating me like I'm less important than everyone else in this house. There was silence. Olivia, who had been sitting quietly, jerked her head up. Wait. Did you actually buy an apartment? What is it? She asked, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to find a trick in my words. For what money? You're just a junior developer, Jenny. I didn't answer. I'm going to pack the rest of my things, I said, walking past them to a pile of boxes in the hallway. I could feel their eyes on my back, tense, confused, annoyed, scared. They have always perceived me as a person who simply adapts to their needs, who agrees even when he doesn't want to, who sacrifices his interests for the sake of the well-being of the family. But this time it was different. I didn't just leave. I was leaving forever. The movers arrived at exactly 7 in the morning, as I had agreed, and without wasting any time, they immediately got to work, taking boxes from the corridor, which doubled overnight while I was packing the last things, checking every corner so as not to leave anything. My family stood in the living room and silently watched this process, as if it were some kind of strange ritual, not interfering, not trying to stop me, but there was tension in the air, as if they hoped to the last that I would change my mind and abandon my decision. Where exactly is this apartment? Dad finally asked when I was doing the last check, making sure I'd taken everything. Near my office, I replied vaguely, not wanting to go into details. How much does it cost? Olivia crossed her arms over her chest, her voice harsh, almost demanding. And how did you allow yourself to do that? I slowly turned to them. They were all standing in the living room, looking at me with expressions of curiosity, incomprehension, and, in Olivia's case, barely concealed annoyance. It's really none of your business, I said calmly. We're your family, Mom looked at me reproachfully. Of course, this is our business. The family works both ways, Mom, I sighed wearily. And for a long time, I was the only one in this house who really pulled everything on myself. What does that mean? Olivia leaned forward, her voice defensive, as if she already sensed the impending accusation. That means I won't be your ATM anymore, I replied firmly. I will no longer give money that no one appreciates, that is never used responsibly. So you're just leaving us? Mom gasped, and her eyes glistened with approaching tears. What about bills, groceries? What about them? I shrugged my shoulders. Olivia and James are adults, they have jobs, let them start contributing. For variety. We can barely afford our own expenses. Olivia immediately protested, her face flushed with indignation. Then maybe you should reconsider your spending habits. I glanced at her, but instead of answering, she just clenched her jaw, as if I had insulted her with something unimaginably terrible. There was a pause, then Olivia suddenly straightened up, some crazy idea flashed in her eyes, and she said sharply, Do you know what I think? You have to give us your apartment. We need her more than you do. We have a child. I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. The sheer audacity of her words was almost impressive. No, Olivia, I finally exhaled, calming down. I'm not giving you my apartment. And I won't give you anything else. Everything's loaded. One of the movers appeared in the doorway, dusting off his hands. Are you ready to go? I nodded, picked up my purse, and headed for the exit. Jenny, please, Mom took one last desperate step toward me. Don't leave like that. I'll call you in a couple of days, I said, making no promises beyond this goodbye. I got in the car and drove out onto the road, feeling as with every mile that separated me from home, the weight that I had carried for so many years was lifted from my shoulders. It was a new stage, my first real step towards freedom, and for the first time in my life, I put myself first. The next few days passed in a blur. I unpacked boxes, ordered new furniture, set up utilities, settled into a place that now belonged only to me. I kept my phone turned off most of the time, knowing that it was probably inundated with calls and messages from my family, which ranged from furious reproaches to complaints, attempts to put pressure on guilt and tearful requests to think again. When I finally turned it on, my guesses were confirmed. Dozens of missed calls, endless messages, from moms, do you even understand what we should do now? Before Olivia, you're so selfish, Jenny. I always have been. James didn't write anything, Dad just sent a short, let's talk. I didn't answer. But after a week, I decided that I should return to my parents' house and try to calmly, without shouting and accusations, explain my position, talk about boundaries and what I expect in the future. That Saturday morning, when I pulled up to the driveway, I noticed the curtains twitching in the living room window. Someone was watching me. I hadn't even knocked and the door was abruptly flung open, and Mom, without giving me a second to react, hugged me tightly. Thank God you're back, she murmured, clearly relieved, which immediately showed on her face. We were so worried. Dad appeared behind her, looking both happy and a little embarrassed, as if he wasn't sure how he should react to my appearance. Olivia and James were already sitting in the living room, and Bruce was playing on the floor, not even looking up, completely immersed in his toys. I took a deep breath, preparing for the conversation that was finally going to put all the dots on the "and." "I'm not moving," I said as soon as I stepped through the door, before any of them could give a prepared speech about how glad they were to see me. "I just came to talk." "We understand," Mom said quickly, pulling me into the house, as if she was afraid I'd change my mind and turn around. "We've been thinking a lot too." I doubted it, but I went in anyway and sat on the couch, folding my hands in my lap and watching my parents exchange nervous glances before Dad spoke. "Jenny, we know we made a mistake," he began, obviously trying to look sincere, but there was still tension in his voice. "Your room is yours again, whenever you want." We moved Bruce back to his old room. "And I didn't make a dressing room," Olivia hurriedly added, as if she was doing me a huge favor. "I can hang my clothes in our bedroom." I looked at their faces full of impatient expectation, as if they were waiting for a joyful sigh from me and words of gratitude for their generous act. "I appreciate that," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm happy in my new place." "But we miss you," Mom interjected, taking my hand. I studied her face, looking for sincerity in it, but all I saw was the careful tactics, the practiced tone they use when they want to get something they need from someone. "Or do you want my money?" I corrected him gently. No one denied it. "We could figure something out," Olivia shrugged, pretending to think out loud. "You could keep your apartment, but maybe continue to help us with expenses. Or, we could move into your apartment, and you could get this house again." I almost laughed. Their arrogance and shameless manipulation were no longer annoying, but rather striking in their predictability. "No, Olivia," I replied calmly. "I'm not giving you my apartment. And I won't give you my money anymore." "But that's not fair," she exclaimed, her face contorted with anger. "You're so selfish. How did you even manage to afford an apartment? Have you been hiding money from us for years?" I exhaled, crossing my arms over my chest. "I sold an application that I was developing at night." They froze. "The security app one was working on," I continued, savoring the moment. "The one you thought I was just playing video games with." There was absolute silence in the living room. "My boss bought it for $500,000, plus royalties," I added, and let the words hang in the air. $500,000, James muttered under his breath, clearly stunned by the amount. Mom looked pale, her lips twitched, as if she was trying to find the words, but couldn't say anything. "Why didn't you tell us?" "What is it?" she finally asked, her voice sounding almost broken. "Because I knew what was going to happen," I answered honestly. "You would have found reasons why you deserve this money more than I do." No one could argue with that. "So you're just leaving us?" Olivia threw up her hands dramatically. "After all we've done for you?" I stood up. "What exactly did you do for me, Olivia?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Did you borrow money that you never returned? Making fun of my clothes? Rearranged my things without asking? Did you use me as a wallet?" She didn't answer. I looked around at my parents, their confused faces, and James, who seemed to prefer to sink into the ground rather than participate in this conversation. "I will always be your daughter and your sister," I said, my gaze lingering on Olivia. "But I won't be your bank anymore." When I walked out the door, I heard them calling me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. But for the first time, those words didn't hurt. It's been 6 months. I haven't spoken to my family since that day. They tried to contact me, but it was always accompanied by financial requests disguised as reconciliation. "How are you, Jenny? We miss you so much. By the way, we're having a bit of trouble here. Could you help?" I didn't answer. Through mutual friends, I found out that they still live together, they still complain about money, and now they're also complaining about me, that I abandoned them, that I didn't appreciate everything they did for me, that I left them without help when they needed it so much. They needed it. And I I was doing well. My apartment was perfect. The space, the silence, the ability to make decisions without looking at anyone else, all this brought me real pleasure. My career was developing rapidly, and the royalties from my app brought me a steady income that I could use the way I wanted, not the way I was expected to. I started traveling, allowed myself beautiful clothes, even though Olivia probably wouldn't approve of anything from my wardrobe. I started dating a man who respected me for my independence, not for how much money I could spend on him. Sometimes, in rare moments of silence, I wondered if I had done the right thing by severing all ties with my family. But then I remembered how they treated me not as a person who needed to be respected, but as a resource that needed to be used. And I knew it wasn't selfish to leave. It was self-preservation.